Welcome to Boys Club Interviews.
This is a show where we bring on people much smarter than us to talk about the new internet.
I'm Natasha Hoskins.
I'm Dina Burke.
And this is Boys Club.
Wait, is it just Boys Club?
It's just Boys Club.
The Boys Club podcast?
No. Just Boys Club. Hi.
Hey.
Ordinals.
Ordinal. We're Ordinal. Or Ordinals and Runes today. A 101. Didn't really know what they were, but now I do.
Yeah, I had a real misunderstanding of the whole thing. So really interesting pod on really the Bitcoin ecosystem and what's happening there.
We had on Matthew Howells-Barby, who is VP of Growth at Kraken. And we were looking for someone to explain Ordinals and Runes. And he did a great job. And he definitely aired more on the technical explanation, but that's what it is. It's technology. On today's pod, we have Matthew Howells-Barby as our guest. He is the VP of Growth at Kraken. We love Kraken. Welcome to the show, Matthew.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So the reason we called in Matt was because we have been seeing all this chat, all this conversation about runes and related to that ordinals. Natasha and I aren't Bitcoin people. Like, we don't come from that side of the ecosystem, and I truly have no idea what's going on over there. And so we asked you to come on to help explain this other universe to us. Seeing so many headlines about runes and ordinals, and it's just is like, phew, over my head. So excited to have you on to help us sort of understand what's going on here.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I think most of it goes over everyone's head, including the people that participate in the space. So I wouldn't feel too bad about it.
Okay, great. From my research, my understanding is that ordinals came first and then runes followed. So does it make sense for us to start at sort of ordinals and get our heads around that, and then we can move on from there to runes?
Yeah. I think that's the best and most logical starting point. Yeah, we had ordinals came first, a few things come after that, and then now we are in the era of runes, I guess. Okay,
so simplest terms possible, what is ordinals? I don't even know if it's what tense we're in, but
what the pronouns are for ordinals. Yeah, we're figuring it out. So the simplest way to think about this is just to think about ordinals as a whole. We'll get into like some of the terminology as NFTs on Bitcoin. And the devil's in the detail here. It's the nuance of like how they're different from what we traditionally know as NFTs on things like Ethereum, Solana, that separates them out. But I think there's a few different ways in which they are different to how we have known NFTs on smart contract blockchains, which of course Bitcoin is not. And I think the biggest piece on where ordinals as a whole really gained some steam and traction was around the storage of content, right? So in the case of NFTs, right, let's just keep things simple. Mm-hmm. PFP, monkey JPEGs, right? And right now, if we look at Ethereum and NFTs, right, if you buy a Bored Ape, right, the artwork is actually not stored on the Ethereum blockchain. It is stored completely off-chain, usually on many different services like IPFS, Arweave, or, it could just be on the AWS servers. It doesn't really matter. The actual on-chain like NFT just simply references the location of that artwork. So it's kind of like your receipt, right? And I think for most people that aren't in the weeds of the technicalities of NFTs, you probably just assume it's all in one place and it's all wrapped up together. But it's an important distinction because on Bitcoin, the content, so the beautiful artwork of that monkey, is hosted directly on the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, then what we have is, which we can probably go one click deeper, is you have then the concept of like NFTs that reference the artwork that's stored on Bitcoin, but everything is on chain. So it's all housed in one place, and it's completely immutable, right? So if our AWS server gets wiped and our monkey JPEGs get wiped they are lost and are no longer able to be referenced in our Ethereum NFTs, right? Like, so that can't happen on Bitcoin. I think that's one important distinction.
Can I just ask one clarifying question, which is that my understanding was always that Bitcoin was inflexible by design, and also part of its beauty was that it's like it's single purpose. And so how are they, I don't know who, but how is one able to like create this more malleable blockchain around Bitcoin and put data? Go, please.
I have a add-on to this question.
Great.
That I think you were getting at is that my understanding is the way that we can use the Ethereum blockchain and other blockchains in a very flexible and creative way is basically through smart contracts, where we're using that blockchain to do all these things. And my understanding, and I think what Dina's speaking to as well, is that Bitcoin by design doesn't have that and has this singular use case. So how is Ordinals actually doing what you're describing of where it's living actually on the blockchain as opposed to being stored somewhere and just having a reference point? And one other quick follow-up question is are Ordinals NFTs on Bitcoin, or are they a NFT project on Bitcoin?
It's a good question. Okay, let's break some of these down, because I think that
great.
we'll wrap into,
we really went rapid fire on you.
Yeah, no, this is great. So you touched on probably the most contentious aspect around kind of the Bitcoin community, which is, should Bitcoin just be used for this one single use case? And I think the social consensus around that prior to Ordinals coming to life in the beginning of 2023 was absolutely. And actually, this is the core value of Bitcoin. It's inflexibility, it's single narrow purpose, no overcomplications, no additional systemic risk. You know, we know what we're getting. And where I think we have arrived, which I don't think many people, probably myself included, thought we would get to, is that social consensus is probably leaning more towards there should be multiple use cases now for Bitcoin, and there's value in that. And I can already feel the anger in the laserized Bitcoin community getting angry
scary.
And disagreeing. Yeah, it's scary, yeah. So I think that's one piece, right? But let's come back to the smart contract piece and some of the technical pieces, because this is where it's important. What's interesting, I think, about Ordinals is the thing that limits Ordinals, and where you could say where its biggest disadvantages, and more specifically Bitcoin as a blockchain, is also some of its strongest value proposition. So it's like inflexibility, its lack of complexity is kind of the thing that has made this, I guess, become so popular. We look at the free-flowing creativity that we've seen, especially in the last bull cycle, around NFTs in particular on Ethereum, right? And the different things we can bake into smart contracts, whether that be, you know, over a set period of time, like, you know, the artwork of an NFT like might change. And you can have these like really complex systems where you burn NFTs and get new ones and like all this other stuff. And it means that the future is less certain for what this like NFT and collection and project actually is, which is very exciting and creative, but comes with it future risk, right? And I think like if arguably, you know, the NFT collection with the greatest provenance that we've seen to date is probably CryptoPunks. And CryptoPunks, you could maybe make a very strong argument for the fact that it's so valuable because it has never tried to do anything complicated, and it has just been there. It was early and it's been there. So I'm just going to like come back a little bit. I think there's a little bit that we should just touch on in terminology, because this is, I think, like the Bitcoin community at its finest, with just, you know, God bless them, developers naming stuff and just making things very, very complicated for everyone involved.
They love to do that. They love it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, you know, one of us touched on the start, you know, ordinals. What actually is the NFT an ordinal? Is the thing an ordinal? Who is an ordinal? So there is ordinals, which is the protocol, which is kind of like the theory built on top of Bitcoin, which is largely all kind of off chain. This became possible. All of what we're discussing today, like the question that comes up a lot is, why didn't we just have NFTs on? Why have we only just had them now? Bitcoin's been around since 2008. Mm-hmm. Like, why? The key change here was in 2021, the Taproot upgrade. that came into fruition. Don't need to get into the technicalities, but it basically facilitated. We'll save everyone that. It facilitated some of the technical requirements that were needed to just create a little bit of flexibility so that we could do what we're doing today with ordinals. Now, you have ordinals for protocol, and I think ordinals is usually a blanket term, right, for everything involved in like Bitcoin NFTs. And then you have inscriptions. Inscriptions are, I guess you could like make the argument, these are the NFTs, right? So the way this works is, so in Bitcoin today, we have, and have always had, Bitcoins, and then the lower denominations of Bitcoins are Satoshis or sats, right? The pennies to the dollar. And then you've got these individual Satoshis. What happens with ordinals is you inscribe an individual Satoshi, which basically just means you place a reference on a Satoshi that basically references the content that you are saying, like the artwork that lives on the Bitcoin blockchain, that says this is like what this NFT like represents ownership in. In the same sense that like in a smart contract on Ethereum, you have the NFT that references, some JPEG in a database somewhere off chain. That this is the way this works. So the thing that's actually being passed around are individual Satoshis, and they're sats that are just traded around, and they basically just have the reference written into them, inscribed. These are referred to as inscriptions. So the kind of inscribing is something you'll hear, and inscription is something you'll hear. Like technically, inscription is like what is the NFT per se. But typically, people will just say it's an ordinal, and it doesn't really matter, right? Because that's just kind of the high level of them on that.
Appreciate the grounding very much in the terminology. Thank you. So I found a Dune dashboard, did as much fact checking as one is able to do on it, but it appears that there's a significant amount of volume that's running through ordinals. What are people doing? Like what's occurring? Are there like NFT collections? Like, is it mirroring the activity that we've seen on the Ethereum blockchain in terms of like NFT collections and PFPs and generative stuff, or is it something else that's emerged on ordinals?
This is where I think this is the most interesting thing that I've noticed over, in particular, the past year with ordinals. Where, so I think one of the questions, I think Natasha, you asked this, is like, is it just one collection? Like or are there like collections? So we started. And this is a big part of ordinals and why there's such interest early on, and why things have kind of trended a little bit different, a very different path to Ethereum, and the way collections and how we typically think about rarity, provenance, and like valuing NFTs. And now we've kind of started to converge into similar trends of this. So I'll explain it very briefly. And it all really rests on two big parts of ordinals. One is the numbering system. So in Ethereum and Solana and pretty much any other like smart contract NFT protocol blockchain, you have individual collections, and the rarity of the individual NFTs in that are determined by a whole host of things. But largely, if we simplify it down to PFPs, like different traits, right? You have like a zombie punk, it's going to be worth way more than like just like a regular punk, and everything is focused on collections. And typically we think about, okay, like what is like a really old, like early collection? It's like the year that the collection launched. Well, there technically isn't, and by the way, and in Ethereum and Solana, these collections are actually formalized in a smart contract, right? There is a fixed supply. They all relate to the same smart contract. In Bitcoin, we don't have this. And instead, what you actually just have is the ordinal kind of like numbering system. So it started from the day that ordinals launched back in, I think, Feb of 2023, maybe January. The first ever ordinal kind of was inscribed, right? That was done by Casey Radama, the person who kind of came up with the ordinals theory and also runes. And that was inscription 0. The next one to be inscribed, inscription 1. The next one, 2, 3. So it's completely serialized. No collection. Just think about like this numbering system to span across all of ordinals, right? So we're currently at around 70 million, bit more than 70 million like of these have been inscribed onto the Bitcoin blockchain. So if you you possess one of these like very early inscriptions, that there's this interesting piece where I was talking about like the lack of flexibility to Bitcoin that will never change. Inscription number 5 will always be inscription number 5 unless the entire
And does that
Bitcoin blockchain
does
changes.
that affect the value of it?
This is where it kind of gets interesting. Yes and no. Like there is
Okay.
absolutely early provenance, like value placed, especially on sub 10K kind of inscription numbers. And I would say this is the number one way that you would kind of determine the value of ordinals early on. And
Okay.
then what we kind of started to see is kind of quote unquote collections forming, where you would have things like, I'm just going to pick a random project, right? Like Bitcoin puppets, right? And they do like a typical 10K collection. It's not really a formal kind of smart contract coded collection. It's more social consensus that this is the case. Those collections that inscribed very, very early on have like real like material value. And then there's just like the typical stuff that makes an NFT project valuable, credibility, kind of the Lindy effect, and just like general provenance of like being a part of that community. So there's this extra piece that is layered into that. And there's one more piece, which is also pretty interesting. So I talked about how ordinals are inscribed onto individual Satoshis, right? So what came with Taproot is the ability to basically like do this piece onto a single Satoshi. Not every Satoshi is equal. And what was built into this was like a rarity system for Satoshis as well. So for example, and this largely is focused around like Satoshis that were mined during notable events like a Bitcoin halving, or were present in certain Bitcoin blocks like the Genesis block, or maybe were in Satoshi's original wallet. And there's basically like common sats, which are just basically the most, as you can imagine, common Satoshi. Then you have uncommon, rare, epic, legendary, mythic. I don't think anyone has actually came out with like any like legendary or mythic ones, but just a little piece on this because we don't need to dig into it too much. But like an epic sat is a Satoshi that was mined on the first of each of the halving blocks. And from this most recent halving, the first kind of epic sat was mined. And it sold at auction for 33.3 Bitcoin. So, it's like around 2.1 million just for the Satoshi.
Wow.
It hadn't been inscribed into. And now I think it was like an AI version of Grimes's voice into a song has been inscribed into it.
Cool. That's a
Yeah.
cool use.
Yeah.
So basically the way that you can think about these Satoshis are almost like real estate. Is that maybe a way
They're
to
the
think about
canvas
it?
to the
Okay.
artwork. They're the real, like
Okay.
they're the land that you build the house on. Exactly.
Okay. And then what you put on top of it, that's going to put the price up or down depending on all these variables that exist within NFTs all over the place. So can we talk about runes a little bit? Just how does this relate to what we're talking about? You mentioned that it was the same creator. Give us a 101 on that.
Yeah. So, ordinals paved the way for non-fungible tokens to be on Bitcoin. And I think, like I mentioned before, despite probably popular opinion, ordinals has categorically proved out, like love it or hate it, that there is a desire and there is demand for Bitcoin to expand its use case. Bitcoin has actually been the number one chain for NFT kind of trading volume relatively consistently since last December, beating Ethereum, Solana. So it's kind of here. And then during last year, kind of middle of the way through last year, a group of people started to say, hey, why don't we have fungible tokens? Like we have ERC20 tokens on Ethereum and, turns out they're quite popular. Why don't we have the same thing on Bitcoin? So then this kind of like protocol arose called BRC20. You may have heard this reference through last year. And this was the first attempt to bring fungible tokens into Bitcoin. I bring this up because Runes is now arguably, or supposed to be, the better version of this. Now, BRC20, it leveraged kind of the same format and system as ordinals, where you would like effectively, if you had like 1,000 supply fungible token, you're still like inscribing these almost like they're individual NFTs. And by the way, this is the biggest point of contention around a lot of ordinals and BRC20 is just the sheer bloat that it puts on Bitcoin. Like, this dramatically raises transaction fees, which miners love. But, we went through, you see every time that ordinals go through a spike in popularity, we're going from like, $1 transaction fees to like $40, right? Oof. It's like a huge congestion. So this is where runes came in. And BRC20 wasn't created by Casey Rodama, who created Ordinals. It was like part of the community. And by the way, it was very popular in terms of trading volume. Like hundreds of millions, probably billions in trading volume was done. I believe a couple of central exchange listings happened. Like there was quite a lot of hype. And then it kind of fizzled out, but there's still a lot of trading activity that happens around it. Runes has come in and is created by Casey, but it takes a slightly different approach to how we produce fungible tokens on Bitcoin versus BRC20s. And I think there's like two big technical differences. I'm going to say what they are, but we won't go too deep into the technicals. I think I'll give the net on why, right? So runes are UXTO based, whereas you have BRC20 tokens, which are ordinals based. So the net on this is that runes create far less transaction bloat on Bitcoin, because with BRC20s, even when you just want to transfer them to someone else, you have to do another inscription. And there's like 2 transactions happening every time. There's a huge amount of bloat. The second piece, which is all related to this, is that the way that information is stored around like, the token ticker, the supply, things like that, it's stored in a Bitcoin transaction on runes in the OP return, which allows for like 80 bytes of data, tiny amount. In BRC20, it's in the witness, which is like 4 megabytes of data, which is like huge amounts. So they get bloated really quick. So not only do you have more transactions having to happen with BRC20, they're way bigger, way more bloated, slow everything down. Runes is just super quick, more streamlined, and I think it just creates less congestion. And that will please the laser eyes Bitcoin community for sure.
Okay. So I'm doing my best to follow along on the technical things. Thank you for breaking it down. There are definitely listeners who appreciate that. When we get into data, I'm like, I don't know. I do not. My megabyte from my kilobyte, I shan't know. But I appreciate it very much. So basically what I'm taking from this is the fungible token, and then by extension, perhaps meme coins on Bitcoin. Is that ultimately where we've landed?
That's where we've largely landed.
Okay.
I think have we just decided that the killer use case right now for crypto is meme coins? I think is that unfortunately the social consensus at the moment. But yes, I think that's where it has started. Will it evolve from there? I imagine a lot. I think meme coins has been a good stress test. But similar to Runes, here's why it's good for meme coins, I would say. Runes is good for meme coins because I would argue that NFTs and the way that people probably trade NFTs, there is a similar mindset to how you might think about trading meme coins, right? There's like cultural phenomena, there's rarity, and it's just like a different way of thinking to an ERC20 token that isn't a meme coin. With runes, they implemented a similar but a different numbering system that is, again, serialized. The first runes that appeared are rune 0, then 1, 2, 3. So there's baked in like provenance that comes. So being one of the first 10 runes and a popular meme coin, most of the runes that have launched, by the way, on Bitcoin come from popular ordinals projects that have then distributed the runes in like big kind of airdrops to their holders. So there's kind of this like baked in game culture that exists that's now like the tokenized version that's more tradable. They're much more supported from a wallet perspective, runes are, versus BRC20s. BRC20s were and continue to be a real nightmare to figure out. If you can get your head even remotely around the technical piece, like good luck trying to get like it into your wallet. So whereas runes are a little bit easier.
Great. This has been super helpful. I feel like I have a much better understanding. So final question here. I feel like my experience in crypto thus far is a technological development happens on one of these blockchains that enables new novel use cases and projects and protocols and all these things. And sometimes that first wave of innovation is maybe a little bit stupid. Like you're kind of like, okay, that's what we did. But then it enables all these other things, and builders can then think about much more interesting consumer use cases for X, Y, or Z. I'm curious if anything off the top of your head from these developments on the Bitcoin blockchain and what is Ordinals and Runes has enabled could potentially, what it could enable for more consumer first applications on Bitcoin. I don't know if there's anything that comes to mind for you around that.
Well, I think this is this is really a great question, because I think what Ordinals did is almost operate as a proof of concept, not for NFTs on Bitcoin, not for kind of like Ordinals as a whole to be like the next biggest thing in crypto, right? Like it's just proving that if you build things on top of Bitcoin, there is a market for this and there is a reasonable outcome that could happen, right? Where like you could achieve product market fit. I think that in itself has inspired a lot of builders that, you know, a parallel narrative that we're seeing outside of Ordinals, Runes, BRC20, all of this, is this huge amount in like Bitcoin layer 2s, which are basically being built on top of Bitcoin now to try and do what I guess this scrappy like Runes kind of thing is doing, but like really formalize and build like quote unquote smart contracts on top of Bitcoin that then pave the way for consumer applications and really valuable kind of ways to interact with Bitcoin. And I think while it's early to see what those specific applications can be, I think we have convinced the builders and the developers that there is a market and there is some like level of appetite to start innovating on top of Bitcoin. Let's not forget, it's like $1.2 trillion of value in Bitcoin is on Bitcoin. And the majority of it, for the longest time, has sat kind of idle, right? And people always assume, myself included for the longest time, that, you know, people don't want to touch their Bitcoin. I saw a great tweet from like Chris Boniski where he's like, you know, your Bitcoin's like soap. Like the more you touch it, the more it disappears, right? And it's like that kind of mentality in Bitcoin is like starting to be broken through. And it would not surprise me at all, I think, with the combination of what we're seeing with this like restaking narrative, which is absolutely coming to Bitcoin, Bitcoin layer 2s, Runes, regardless of whether it takes off or not, and Ordinals continuing in that space. It's bringing now a user base, which then means we can start doing kind of proof of concept on more interesting consumer applications.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
That would be my
Exciting. Very exciting.
It's pretty exciting, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, Matt, thank you so much. This was such a great overview on what's happening over there in the Laser Eye community. And really, really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me both.